Thank you very much, Jeremy, for coming and hanging out at MardiGrass again. It's one of the good reasons to get elected to Parliament is you come to one of the coolest festivals in the entire universe. And also one of the longest running, we're up to the 32nd year, so can you believe it? There's people that have been working on this event now for decades, and yeah, kudos to them for their persistence and their love for cannabis. So Jeremy is a Legalise Cannabis MP in New South Wales, who is very much committed to bringing about progressive drug law reform, legalising cannabis and fixing the broken RDT system and growing the hemp industry. So Jeremy is also, we're working you the hardest this weekend. We always we pick on someone every year. It's Jeremy this year. So after he does this talk, he's running to Indica Arena, and he's going to be talking there about the New South Wales Hemp Industry Task Force, which was just set up in February. But for this particular session, you're talking about good old prohibition and how it contributes to organised crime, gang violence, and of course enormous costs to all of us as well as government. So thank you, Jeremy.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, it's a real honour to be here. This is my second MardiGrass as a Legalise Cannabis MP, and it is a real institution. It is a real honour to be an advocate and a representative of this community, this culture, this movement to end prohibition. And MardiGrass is just fantastic. It's such a fantastic, high energy expression of everything about our community, but also about the cannabis community. And it is a culture. It's one of the first things I said when I was re-elected to New South Wales Parliament, that cannabis is not just a plant, it's a community, it's a movement, and it manifests itself in so many beautiful ways: art, craft, language, music. They're all influenced by cannabis and our thoughts. And so representing that in Parliament is a real honour, and being able to come here and share in this MardiGrass. And I did share quite a bit of grass last night, so I am a little hazy, but I'll try not to bore you and wander off too much. But my speech today is about, and the conversation, I was going to basically talk for 20 minutes and then get some feedback, because this is a really important focus group for me. I want to talk to my community and hear back from you about what we're doing and what your views on what I'm saying are. So I'm looking forward to a bit of Q&A at the end. But the focus for me is on how do we end the crazy war on drugs? How do we go? There's a lot of momentum in the cannabis space at the moment, coming from the private sector, from business, from the community, and now politics. But how do we tip over? As Sue was just saying in her contribution, how do we make that last mile to legalisation? And how do we turn the arguments that have been used against us for so long, quite effectively, you've got to say, 100 years of prohibition, against our opponents, and really achieve what so many people have been campaigning for decades for, an end to prohibition and the legalisation of cannabis. So I thought I'd start at the start, and that is the war on drugs. It has been a massive, a gigantic, trillion-dollar global fuck-up, one of the greatest failures in all human history, the movement to criminalise cannabis. That's where it started. The war on drugs started in the 1920s in the United States. Basically, we think it's stupid, and it has been a massive failure, but it's stupid by design. It was always meant to do the terrible things that it did. It was about oppressing a plant so that they could oppress communities. People of colour, Latino, the gay community, environmentalists, socialists, whoever it is, they were. The prohibition was always used as a tool to crack down on political, philosophical, racial dissent, and had been incredibly successful in doing that. And all the terrible outcomes we've seen from the war on drugs were by design. It's clear when you look at the history of the DEA and the FBI, it did what it was supposed to do. Put a lot of black American men in jail, crack down on dissent. It was always designed to quieten those voices for change across a whole range of different sections of our society. We've seen that in the United States, and now in the United States, what we're seeing is it wash back the other way. As with life and energy, there's a pendulum. It swings one way hard, and it's swinging back the other way. And it really is swinging back the other way in the United States. Unfortunately, Australia is always a little bit behind, but we are going to ride, I think, the US's coattails into a future where prohibition ends. Physically, the Legalise Cannabis Party is an embodiment of that movement, and it's not just the argument about the benefits of cannabis, which are very strong, that the government's really listening to. They really are starting to add up the cost to the community in terms of criminalising so many people unnecessarily, turning a lot of people into criminals. As the hemp embassy and people have said for so long, the law is the crime, and the outcomes are, we've got decades of research now that show that these laws have been used to crack down on young people in the regions. They've been used to crack down on Aboriginal people. One of the first reasons that young Aboriginal women come into contact with the criminal justice system is cannabis laws. And that is, we are criminalising and targeting some of our disadvantaged and marginalised people, and cannabis laws have been used to do that, and the politicians know that. They know that the war on drugs has had a massive adverse impact on those communities. And New South Wales is a case in point. What's really interesting about what's happening in the US in terms of the war on drugs is that it's flipped over so much now that the narrative is not just about, the war on drugs has been a failure, we should stop it. It's actually the war on drugs has been a massive failure, we need to clean up our mess. They've moved to that stage. There's a bill been introduced into the new US Congress by the Democrats just this week, and it's called the Administration and Legalisation of Cannabis Opportunities Bill. And what the beginning of the bill has a preamble, and that preamble talks about the cost of the war on drugs on the community, in terms of the millions of people it's put in jail, the trillions of dollars it's cost. And what's fascinating about that bill is it now takes the next step and says we need to recompense, we need to reinvest in those communities, we need to pay reparations to those people that got caught up in the gears in the war on drugs, which is a fascinating, I think, as a policymaker, to see that, to consider prohibition in the same way we've considered some of these other terrible social policies like slavery and the like, and so that there's actually going to be a process of truth-telling, reconciliation and recompense for the war on drugs. No one really out there as a serious policymaker is saying that this has been a spectacular success. It has been a disaster, and in the United States is a massive laboratory for what happens when you start to unpick that social policy, and people are clearly seeing that the benefits of cannabis, of ending prohibition, are incredible. The bill that the Democrats have just presented sets out that the US cannabis industry, in terms of sales, last year was worth $33 billion. In 5 years' time, it'll be $65 billion. That is a huge industry. That means it's going to it's bigger than coffee and chocolate already in the United States by a long way, and will be as big as the wine industry in 5 years' time about the quarter of the size of the alcohol industry. So there's just massive political, social and capital support for the cannabis industry in the United States, and to the point now where that the moral imperative has not been, is no longer just say no. It's just like it's all about how we redress and as the Democrats have said, seize the opportunities of cannabis. That's how they're framing their cannabis bills, the Cannabis Opportunities Bill. And that's I think there's a lot of learnings for us in Australia about how we reframe the narrative. We flip it around. We use the energy that's been coming at us for so long, about being tough on crime, the war on drugs, and this is about protecting people, to use those arguments in our fight. We say, well, if you want to make people safe, regulate this market, allow them to grow their own plants. Let's have a regulated market where quality control goes out of the hands of the comancheros and crime gangs and into the hands of us as individuals, as responsible adults growing our own plants, using it responsibly, or as a society being able to regulate a market, tax and distribute cannabis to the people that want it as a medicine and want it as a recreation. And so how do we do that? How do we flip that narrative around? Well, I've been saying in Parliament, let's get tough on crime. Let's get tough on organised crime. Legalise cannabis. The last thing that these organised crime groups want is to have basically the startup model for their enterprises removed from them. One of New South Wales' most senior police officers described cannabis as the rocket fuel of organised crime. And so that's an incredibly powerful argument to take to the Premier and say, you want to get tough on organised crime? Well, take away their business model. Setting up 5 Vietnamese guys in grow houses in Western Sydney, or, turning a few tunnels of pot over on the northern rivers is a way that some of these big organisations generate hundreds of millions of dollars and then put into other bad things. Wouldn't it be better for us to be able to grow our own plants, or have, as we do in our model, like a social club model moving down the track to a sort of regulated commercial model? Wouldn't that be a better outcome? And tell me how that's going to be good news for organised crime. And that resonated straight away. The Premier didn't have he agreed wholeheartedly this was a way to undercut organised crime. And Sue was talking about it just previously, about how sadly so much of our political discourse and what things come to the top and the problems get solved is determined by right-wing media. And we can lament that. That's terrible, but it's just how it is. It's the polar star that so many weak-willed politicians navigate by is 2GB and the Daily Telegraph. But by taking this line of let's get tough on organised crime, legalise cannabis, we got an editorial in the not in the Sydney Morning Herald, in the Daily Telegraph of all places, saying we really do need to redress these laws. This is a really powerful argument. If you want to take cannabis and all this cash out of the hands of organised crime, let's regulate. And so that's an argument I've been making over and over, and it really is starting to bear fruit. This state government is soft-pedalling on cannabis law reform at the moment. They recognise the need to change, but they're not very courageous. There's no doubt about it. We hardly meet as a parliament, and I don't think they want to. They recognise they're going to have to bring about cannabis law reform and end prohibition. They just don't think that they want it to be the first thing that they do. So we've got a drug summit coming up later this year, which is going to deal with all illicit drugs and how we reform that whole space. That's just the political reality. I wanted to sort of ring fence cannabis from that conversation, that political conversation. I wanted to sort of take cannabis out of the illicit drug conversation, So what I pushed for successfully was the establishment this year of, and it's actually running now, it's just seeking submissions, the first inquiry we've ever had in New South Wales into the regulatory regime around cannabis. Really a deep dive by the Parliament into prohibition, you know, where did it come from, has it worked, no, what are we going to do next, and hear from all the players, all the voices, so we get a series of recommendations, like a comprehensive report backed up by recommendations that we can go public with before we have the drug summit. So that into that conversation about, you know, how do we move on from the stupid war on drugs, how do we get tough on crime, we've got some recommendations to put forward to the government that are backed up by, you know, that big body of work. So, so that's a constructive, I think, strategy to work through this parliamentary process and the policy building process, and it really is working. The government is recognising, from a policy sense, there has to be change, and they're really amazed and I think slightly terrified by how broad and deep the support for the cannabis movement is, how sophisticated people's understanding is of the issue. People have seen the war on drugs, they're educated on it, they've seen the same story over and over again, failure, locking up Aboriginal kids, you know, criminalising a whole class of people, but they're recognising now that that class of people that they've criminalised and the people that are supportive of cannabis are a big fucking deal. They are a really powerful electoral cohort, and they are regional, they are working class, they are not the stereotype, the trope that's been perpetuated about who a cannabis user is. And what they're realising is that cannabis users are everywhere, and they are from all different demographics. They are from you know, all different cultural backgrounds, but they are a very powerful group, especially in the working class. There's a friend of mine who says it's not, you know, rocket science, Jeremy. It's a working class drug. It's a drug that is used in some of the most electorally important areas in the country. The Hunter Valley, case in point, Western Sydney, areas where governments, whether or not they get elected there or not, political parties, whether or not they get elected there or not, determine whether or not they actually form government. People in those areas are aware of this issue, care about this issue, and voting on this issue, and they're educated enough to understand that we need this change and we should prioritise this as a problem to solve now. A lot of people look at politics and it's very partisan and all the rest, and you vote for a political party. I think people are really attracted to the Legalise cannabis movement because it's just one great idea, you know, with so many facets. And so that's what's really attracting people to the party, that there's this big, long history of, you know, social engineering, policy failure, terrible outcomes in terms of criminal justice and perpetuating this business model for crime. And here's an opportunity to vote for an idea, not personality politics. You know, let's get this one thing done. And I think that's very appealing to, you know, all the activists here and to us, of course, but also to just regular voters. It's an idea, a policy that they can say, well, just now I'm going to vote for this party, get this thing solved. It's very appealing, I think, to millennial and the Zoomer generation. They're less tribal and partisan, and they're more likely to sort of be consumers of ideas and pick something up for a little while and, you know, just get something done. And I think that that's building this momentum towards, I think in the medium term, us getting the outcome we want. Hopefully we'll get a New South Wales Labor government by the next election, which is in 2027, taking a policy of legalisation. But if they don't, I think it's something that would come very soon after the next election. Basically, if we get another 2 people elected, We have a good result in the state election in Western Australia. We have a good result in Victoria, which I think we will. Then we could have a state government come forward and say, well, look, it's not our idea, but, you know, these people are being elected. The electors have spoken. I know. There's a one-eyed dog. I don't know if that's what that means. It's a sign of something. I'm being too one-eyed. I'm a one-eyed dog. But I think that's the juncture, and that pressure is building, and I think that's will be borne out. And then you add to that that policy issue, and just looking at prohibition in terms of policy, you add to the fact that there's this huge industry growing globally that is behind the scenes making all the noises that you'd expect, you know, big multinational corporate players to make, which is, hey, if you loosen up the reins here, there's a lot of money to be made. As I said, in the US, $30 billion industry now. It will be a $1 trillion industry, cannabis, probably by the end of the decade globally, legal cannabis. And in Australia, the policymakers are recognising that we can take this policy failure off the books, we can benefit our society in terms of jobs and economic development. And now I know our model is homegrown, that's what our bill is, first of all, but that is a really important argument to be putting on the table with the state government. Recently I went to Tasmania and visited Tasmania Botanics. They're a company set up, and it's a really interesting tale because they're a company set up in North Hobart. It's one of the most socio-economically depressed areas of Australia, like 30-40% unemployment, 80% social housing, a pretty rough area. If anyone watches Spanion on the YouTube, he just went there. And it's a rough area. It's a tough and rough area. And a lot of cannabis use, there's no doubt. Well, they've taken a former jail. They closed down a jail and they've turned it into a cannabis cultivation facility. So whereas previously they were locking people, you know, in, and now they've and they were locking the users of cannabis up in the jail. Now the users of cannabis are going into the jail, farming cannabis, chopping up cannabis, and going to work. And that facility there in Bridgewater and Gagebrook is the biggest employer in the region. It employs 150 people, and it's just popped up overnight, and the community support for that is enormous. So that sort of example is really, really powerful if it's expressed to policymakers, to politicians. If we say to them, you can solve a whole heap of problems here, you can stop criminalising these people for consuming cannabis, and then you can give them a job in the industry, it's a really, really powerful argument. So those different streams of political pressure are converging into a real torrent, and that is the economic argument's huge. We've got the example of the United States. The policy failures, well, they're writ large, and the alternatives that we're putting on the table have a lot of public support from areas where I don't think people traditionally realised it was coming from. When you tell people that the Legalise Cannabis Party is most popular, our biggest support base is North Queensland, and you know, a lot of Queensland federal electorates, we get 7-8% of the vote already. That's where a lot of elections have, you know, and governments have been elected or fallen on the basis of how well they do in Queensland. That's a really powerful argument, and so we need to capitalise on that momentum, on that stream, make that last jump, that last mile. We have to be patient. Like, politics is very transactional, you know, and you feel like you got elected, we're here to do a job, and then you run into the inertia and the you know, that you get in governments, and you try to steer it around. But I think we can collaborate with, you know, with Labor governments and move in the right direction. But we have to sort of set some time limits on that. And I think that it's reasonable that the government responds in a considered way, and I think that they should probably be looking to solve this issue in the next sort of 3 to 4 years. So that's where I think we're up to. I think that there's a massive amount of political momentum. The Legalise Cannabis Party, we take it sort of for granted. Political movements don't come along very often that actually get people elected. It's quite rare. And for the Legalise Cannabis Party in 2 years to have elected representatives in 3 states, to have our federal vote double at every federal election, 150,000, 300,000, 600,000. If we continue that sort of growth, we'll be probably the 4th largest political party in Australia in the next 2 to 3 years. So we won't be a micro party, it will be a major political player. And so it's up to us as a community, as an activist-led organisation, to really make that push over the next 2 to 3 years, so that we see the change come in, So there's a pathway to success. Building those narratives is really critical, and turning the energy that's been coming at us for so long with so much negativity and been so effective, turning that back against our proponents is crucial. The last thing I would say is what is surprising in doing that work is we're just not getting the pushback. Where are our political opponents? Where are the people you see out there screaming about, the moral dangers of, reefer madness, and just saying no? They have disappeared. They really have disappeared out of the scene. I think they may re-emerge to some extent, but day to day in the community and in parliaments, you just do not see it. No one wants to be the opposition to us. Really, they understand the electoral power that the cannabis movement has. They understand that it makes so much sense socially and economically, so they don't want to be on the other side of it. So that is really exciting as well. You go, oh, hold on, the field's been vacated to some extent. The moral panic, the pearl-clutching brigade of former MP Fred Nile, the Christian Democrats, that's disappeared. And even on the conservative side of politics, people like One Nation, they recognise a lot of their supporters are pro-cannabis. The Liberal Democrats are pro-cannabis. So that's another element of this debate, which means that we are more likely to succeed than not. So very exciting. And as I say, the war on drugs is coming to an end, and a great opportunity for us to talk about what comes next, and also how we redress some of the mistakes of the past. But that's enough from me. Thank you. Maybe we can have some questions, some comments.
Yeah, wait till we come with the mic. So you're lucky first.
Thank you. Thanks for coming here. Thanks for your comments. How have you seen the very powerful alcohol lobby reacting to the more positive influence of people like yourself, but also the movement, which is pro-cannabis?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What I've seen is the alcohol lobby start to turn its attention to how they make some money out of this as well. Like, really, that. I think that they're seeing that. I was approached by the Australian Hotels Association. So that's the peak body for the pubs and hotels. And in that conversation, they recognised that cannabis was going to affect their bottom line, their business model, in terms of alcohol consumption. And I don't think they recognise there's not much they can do about that. But what they were particularly interested in is how they can benefit from it, and so they can offer up cannabis tourism, cannabis hotels, this type of thing. And it is actually a really interesting question for us and for society is how do we regulate the public consumption of cannabis in sort of certain locations? Do we have social clubs that are not-for-profits, or do we allow the private sector to offer up, cannabis smoking rooms, or those sectors, the hotels, the alcohol sector, and also the gaming sector, and the entities that rely on them, they're looking for alternative revenue streams. The sin taxes, as it were, that governments have relied on alcohol and tobacco and gambling, they're coming down as we move to regulate, especially gambling in this state, which is just out of control. Pokies and now online gambling, as we seek to regulate that and reduce the harm that's coming from that affects the government's bottom line. And so the clubs in New South Wales, the hotels and the government, that's part of this conversation, how they can potentially be part of a legalised regime. And, not-for-profit clubs potentially offering up, facilities for people to go, have a smoke, have a vape, in an indoors, outdoor area, have a nachos, watch the band, watch the football, that sort of thing. That's something they recognise. And of course, already cannabis tourism is huge globally. People flying into Koh Samui in Thailand to, go to a day spa or a weekend spa and, enjoy cannabis and the like. So that's what I've seen. I think they recognise it's going to be a huge international commodity. There's not much they can do about it, but how they can integrate it into their businesses is that what they're turning their attention to.
Have you seen how they've started already?
Wait for the microphone, please.
Okay.
And there's another...
Hello. Thank you, Jeremy. I agree with your points and love your work. 2GB represents a large sector of the electorate, and our political leaders pay heed to that kind of right-wing conservative media, as you say. Minns doesn't want to lead with the cannabis issue as he fears it will give the wrong message and impression to those majority conservative voters, and hence he will lose votes. And that's all prudent. However, I have concerns over the prohibition and the war on drugs argument. It may be refuted by those asserting that such laws actually do work. For instance, in the case of OxyContin or criminalising ice, as accessibility is seen to play a major part in usage and addiction. I'm interested how the prohibition argument may be received by the anti-cannabis brigade and those who still assert that cannabis is a drug.
Okay, thank you. That was a good question. The answer to that is I think that we're going to be pleasantly surprised as this debate matures and moves into the community by how well received it's going to be by the conservative press. My inclination is that if they were going to try and squash us in terms of the legalised cannabis movement, like the Daily Telegraph and 2GB and Channel 7 and the conservative media, the Australian, they'd be doing it now. They really would be doing it now. They'd be working through their lines, developing their messaging. They'd be trying to nip us in the bud, as it were. They really would be trying to do that now. The last thing you want to let your political opponent get is momentum. And that's what we're getting. We're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're becoming more sophisticated. The legalised cannabis movement's, one of the most coherent. It doesn't matter which part of the country you go to, people are saying a similar thing, a similar way. So we've got a lot of coherence, a lot of momentum. So those organisations, if they were going to come out against us, they'd be doing it now. They'd want to squash us quickly. Now they may re-emerge in some form, but as I said previously, what 2GB and others know is that when they do stories about cannabis, they rate through the roof. Everyone's interested. And you don't have to, like I've done a lot of listening to talkback radio. I've been on Ben Fordham 2GB, I think 3 times in the last year, which is a lot for, state MP. And every single time the feedback, even on that program, is split at the very worst. There are a considerable number of people who get on there and say, yes, we need to fix our broken RDT laws. I'm a worker. I don't want to be on endone. I want to be able to have my medicinal cannabis and drive to work. When's Chris Minns going to do something about this? And then they'll have someone else get on and say, we don't want people on drugs on the road, or something silly like that. But the point I'm making is it's of interest to the broader electorate. It's on particular interest in working class areas. And no matter where I go, I've got a friend who just said, I was playing, at the golf club, and the issue that she worked in the legalised cannabis movement came up, and everyone was like, the legalised cannabis. Well, actually, and then they always have a story about someone they know who's on medicinal cannabis, or someone they know who, had cancer and got some cannabis from a friend, and this and that and the other. And then, by the way, I've just got back from New York or California, or, and they're aware of the issue. And so it is across class, it's across geography, but it definitely is concentrated in the working class. So I don't think we're going to see the pushback that we have from the conservative press as we have in the past, because I think that there was... it was interesting, I had a conversation last night with some of the heads down in there at the hemp bar. The generation that really got heavily indoctrinated in, reefer madness, the war generation. And, time marches on. They're slowly dropping off the perch. But that was in the 50s and 60s, there was a really heavy indoctrination about how terrible, marijuana was. And for generations that have come after, well, we've got the news that was a massive beat up. And so, there's the understanding in the community is deep, and the conservative press, they know. When you've got people like Matthew Johns, who's a cultural icon, football star, saying, cannabis saved my life, and Lauren Jackson, again, out there saying how incredible cannabis has been to her life, it smashes these lazy tropes about who a cannabis user is and what cannabis is to pieces. And yeah. Yeah, and it's a medicine, not a drug, of course.
Okay, we have a question here.
Back to your earlier question, the alcohol industry has already surreptitiously got their eyes on hemp beer. There's a multitude of small breweries, boutique breweries, who are doing it. And if a major one doesn't do their own, they'll be buying out those smaller breweries. Secondly, a good starter or stopper in a conversation to gain the initiative when we're talking about this is, do you prefer a white market or a black market? Thank you.
Yeah, look, they're good points. I had a very nice hemp beer in Tasmania, actually, so, I'm okay with that. But the big end of town, the venture capitalists, they're all working out how they can get a piece of the pie. And as we look at how big the market is in America, it's going into mass consumables. So it's going to end up as, you're going to end up in the future with cannabidiols and cannabinoids in your muesli bar, in your soft drink, everywhere. It's going to be, it'll end up being, a correlation with how we deal with caffeine, really. I think that's where it's going, and so that is a very powerful argument, how big it is. And in terms of the black market, white market, exactly, that is a really powerful way to make the case. Do you want to be pouring hundreds of millions of dollars? And one of the farms up here in the North Coast and in Queensland that got busted 2 years ago, that was $500 million, and so and that was run by some Laotian guys on a temporary visa, but big links to organised crime in Sydney. What are they going to do with their $500 million? Well, they go to Vietnam and buy meth, or they bring in some coke, or they buy handguns, or they, sex trafficking and all the rest of it, terrible things. So that is a really powerful argument we've got about taking it out of the hands of those guys, putting it in, the hands of just responsible adults, grow 6 plants at home, and if not, go to a social club and share some with your friends.
I was going to say, I'm really sorry, but we have one more question. I know you're very keen up there, but maybe chat to Jeremy after. That would be great, thank you. So, lady with the beanie, go ahead. You're the last one for this session.
I really just wanted to comment on your starting point about the war on drugs. My introduction to this recently was reading a book called Chasing the Scream, and that really shifted my understanding of this whole war on drugs in America, and I can see how it's infiltrated us as well, because we seem to follow their lead. As somebody who was born in the mid-50s, I'm really interested also in seeing how the decriminalisation through the medicinal cannabis is affecting people of my age group. I'm nearly 70, and I look at my people that have got aches and pains like I've got, and the tide's turning for older people, not just the younger ones, and I think that that's a really good starting point for people like in 2GB.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Hands up anyone in the room who's never experienced pain. Yeah, and so if you've got a medicine that deals with an ailment as broad as pain in all its shape, all its guises, then you're going to have a really powerful tool, a really powerful medicine that everyone's going to be interested in. The treatment of pain, which cannabis is so important for, is something that everyone turns their attention to at some point. And so that's why it doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, where you live. Once you're in pain, once you're sick, once you've got a health issue going on, and cannabis is in that discussion, people, they get, as I was saying, they get sophisticated. They build their understanding, and they don't want some glib politician, for political reasons, getting in between them and their medicine, them and a better life. And that, and so that's very powerful. And exactly. And then the alternative is here. You've got some depression. Here's some antidepressants which probably aren't going to work and are going to make you sick. So people understand that. They've got that lived experience, either themselves or someone they love or someone they know, and that's Australia's the most profitable, the fastest growing, and the largest by per capita medicinal cannabis industry in the world. And so, with 1 million prescriptions now, hundreds of thousands of people, add on top of that, day-to-day users in the illicit market as well, it's the majority of Australians have had some lived experience with cannabis and how it helps with health and pain, and that's a really powerful argument. On top of that key one, if you haven't read The Scream, it's such an incredibly powerful book, and really pulls back the veil on just the racism. There's just pure racism that was inherent in Prohibition, and the injustice that really did so much damage to so many millions of people. People of colour, people of different political ideologies, the queer community, Like if you look at the demographics of people who are over-policed and more likely to have an interaction with the police in regards to cannabis, it's Aboriginal Australians and queer Australians. And for a long time, it's how the police harassed people in Sydney, stopping some gay guys, searching them, doing them for 50 a foil of pot, and fucking up their lives or making their lives worse because there's prejudice and discrimination in some of our in our government, of course. So, two really important issues and reasons why ultimately we will win, because society doesn't want to see government getting in the way of medicine, and the government can't make the case that these are just laws and they don't impact on people in a really serious way and unfairly too. So I think that's me done. I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
And